The first word the triplets ever spoke was not daddy, not help, and not even a cry. It was a correction. Noah Bennett had been employed at Whitmore House for exactly 17 minutes when he realized rich people did not live in houses. They lived inside very expensive weather. The mansion stood at the end of a half-mile private drive outside Boston, all white stone, black iron gates, and windows tall enough to make a normal person feel like a decorative mistake. Rain slid down the glass in silver ribbons, turning the whole place into something cold and beautiful, like a castle that had forgotten how to welcome anyone home. Noah stood in the entryway with one suitcase, one borrowed coat, and the strong suspicion that his life choices had finally formed a union and voted against him. He was 24, and Omega, broke enough to consider instant noodles a food group, and apparently now the newest live-in maid for Alexander Whitmore, the alpha billionaire whose name appeared on business magazines, hospital wings, and several headlines that made him sound less like a man and more like a weather event in a tailored suit. The housekeeper, Mrs. Ellery, gave Noah a tour with the warmth of a tax audit. No running in the West Hall. No touching the locked piano. No entering Mr. Whitmore's study unless summoned. No speaking to the children unless necessary. That last rule made Noah blink. Children? Mrs. Ellery's mouth tightened as if the word itself had been left out in the cold. The triplets. 5 years old. Oliver, Mason, and Lucas. They do not speak. Doctors have been consulted. Specialists have been hired. Mr. Whitmore does not appreciate pity. Great, Noah thought, because pity was not on his resume. Panic, however, was heavily featured. By 9 o'clock, the storm had thickened, the halls had gone quiet, and Noah was kneeling outside the children's wing with a bucket of warm water, trying to scrub a mysterious crayon mark off marble that probably cost more than his old apartment building. Then he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Not loud, not playful, just small, careful. Wrong. Noah looked toward the nursery door, which had been left open by an inch. Another tap came from inside, followed by the faintest scrape, like someone dragging a toy across wood. Common sense told him to find Mrs. Ellery. His heart told him there was a child in there, and unfortunately his heart had always been dramatic and difficult to ignore. He pushed the door open. The room beyond was huge and moonlit, filled with shelves of untouched toys, 3 small beds made with military precision, and a grand piano covered by a white cloth. Under that piano sat 3 little boys in matching blue pajamas, lined up shoulder to shoulder like tiny ghosts at a board meeting. They all had pale blonde hair, wide gray eyes, and expressions far too serious for anyone who still had dinosaurs on their socks. Noah froze. They froze back. Perfect. Wonderful. A diplomatic crisis in footy pajamas. Hi, Noah whispered, lifting both hands as if approaching wild deer with trust issues. I'm Noah. I'm new, which you probably guessed from the bucket and the look of unpaid student loans. The smallest boy, Lucas, clutched a stuffed rabbit tighter. Thunder rolled over the roof. Mason flinched so hard his shoulder bumped Oliver's. Oliver did not move, but his tiny hand slid in front of his brother's, protective and silent. Something in Noah's chest went soft and sore. He lowered himself onto the carpet, keeping several feet between them. It's okay, he said gently. Storms are loud, but they're mostly just clouds throwing furniture around upstairs. No reaction, not even a blink. Noah swallowed. When he was little and scared, his mother used to sing to him, badly, lovingly, and usually off-key enough to alarm nearby pets. He had not sung that song in years. He barely remembered all the words. But the room felt too quiet, and the boys looked too alone, so Noah breathed in and let the melody come out small. The first notes trembled, then steadied. His voice filled the nursery like warm milk poured into a cracked cup. He sang about moonlight on windows, about little stars finding their way home, about sleeping safe until morning. Halfway through, he forgot the next line and made one up about a sleepy bear wearing rain boots. The smallest boy's head snapped up. Noah stopped breathing. Lucas stared at him, lips parting just enough for the whole world to tilt. Then, in a voice rusty from disuse but perfectly clear, he whispered, "That's not how it goes." For one full second, Noah forgot he owned bones. The little boy had spoken so softly that the storm almost swallowed it, but the words still landed in the room like a teacup dropping in a cathedral. Mason turned to Lucas with round, shocked eyes. Oliver went perfectly still, his small hand tightening around his brother's sleeve. Noah stared at them, heart pounding so hard he was afraid it might apply for a louder job. That is not how it goes. 5 words. 5 impossible, tiny, world-breaking words. Noah should have called Mrs. Ellery. He should have stepped back, apologized to the expensive carpet, and removed himself from whatever miracle had just wandered into his lap, wearing blue pajamas. Instead, because he was apparently allergic to sensible choices, he whispered, "You are right. I am sorry. I forgot the real line." Lucas blinked. His lips pressed together, like the words had escaped by accident, and he was trying to catch them before anyone noticed. Noah kept his voice gentle. "Maybe you can help me remember it sometime. No pressure. I accept musical criticism from all qualified Rain Boot Bear experts." Mason made a sound. Not a word. Not quite. More like a breath that wanted to become one. Noah's chest tightened. Then the hallway outside filled with footsteps, fast and heavy, and the air changed before the door even opened. It was not dramatic in a movie way. It was worse. It was the sudden awareness that someone powerful had entered the weather. Alexander Whitmore appeared in the nursery doorway wearing a dark dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, his silver blonde hair slightly damp from the rain, his gray eyes sharp enough to cut through every excuse Noah had not prepared. The Alpha's presence pressed into the room, cold and controlled, but beneath it was something raw, like a man who had been running toward a sound he had stopped believing he would ever hear. "What did you do?" Alexander asked. Noah stood so quickly his knee bumped the bucket behind him. Water sloshed onto the carpet. "Wonderful. First night on the job, and he had discovered speech, committed carpet damage, and possibly angered a billionaire alpha in under 20 minutes. I did not do anything, sir. I mean, I opened the door, which I now understand may have been more of a legal event than a doorknob event, and then there was thunder, and they were under the piano, and I sang because they looked scared." Alexander's gaze moved past him to the triplets. Lucas had both hands buried in Noah's apron, clinging to the fabric like it was the only warm thing in the room. Mason leaned close to Noah's leg without touching it. Oliver, brave little Oliver, had positioned himself between Alexander and his brothers, chin lifted, silent as a locked door. The sight seemed to strike Alexander somewhere no one else could see. His expression did not soften, exactly. It cracked for half a heartbeat, then sealed itself again. "Lucas," Alexander said, voice lower now. "Did you speak?" Lucas looked down. The room held its breath. Rain tapped against the windows. Noah felt the child's fingers tremble against his apron. Alexander took one step forward, and all 3 boys shifted closer to Noah. The movement was small, but the meaning was enormous. Alexander stopped as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. Mrs. Ellery arrived behind him, pale and breathless, one hand pressed to her chest. "Mr. Whitmore, I heard voices." Alexander did not look away from Noah. "So did I?" The words were calm, but they carried the weight of 3 silent years. Noah wanted to explain again, but Lucas leaned against his knee, and every explanation in his mouth turned into dust. Alexander finally turned his eyes fully on him. "From now on, you do not enter this room without permission. You do not sing to them without permission. You do not touch them unless instructed." Noah swallowed. "Yes, sir." But Lucas made a tiny wounded sound and clutched the apron tighter. Alexander heard it. Everyone heard it. For a moment, the alpha looked less like a boss and more like a father standing outside a window, watching warmth happen without knowing how to step inside. By morning, Whitmore House had discovered a new and deeply unfair hobby: pretending nothing had happened. Breakfast appeared under silver lids. The floors shined. Mrs. Ellery moved through the halls with her usual funeral home elegance. Alexander Whitmore left for his downtown office before sunrise, taking with him his black car, his colder-than-February expression, and the kind of silence that made every clock in the mansion sound guilty. Noah was given a printed schedule, 3 pages long, color-coded, laminated, and emotionally threatening. Laundry at 7. East Hall dusting at 8. Pantry inventory at 9. No unsupervised access to the children's wing. No singing. That last instruction had been written in red ink, underlined twice. Noah stared at it in the servant's kitchen while eating toast, so dry it felt like a punishment from a Victorian novel. No singing. Fantastic. He had been a maid for less than a day and had already been banned from music, childhood bonding, and possibly joy. He told himself it was fine. He was here to work, not to adopt 3 silent little princes with storm-cloud eyes. He repeated that very responsible thought while folding towels in the second-floor laundry room, and he almost believed it until a small blue music book slid across the floor and bumped his shoe. Noah froze. Slowly, he looked toward the doorway. No one was there. The hall beyond was empty, polished, and innocent in a way that was clearly lying. He picked up the book. It was old, the cover soft at the corners, with a faded moon painted in silver. On the first page, someone had written Clara Whitmore in graceful blue ink. Noah ran his thumb over the name. Clara. He had heard it only once, whispered by one of the younger maids as if the walls might report her. Alexander's late wife. The triplets' mother. Before Noah could think too hard, a tiny hand appeared around the doorframe, placed a yellow crayon on the floor, and vanished. Noah blinked. Then Mason peeked in, saw Noah looking, and disappeared with the speed of a haunted squirrel. Noah pressed his lips together to keep from laughing. The laugh came out anyway, quiet and helpless. I am not singing, he whispered toward the hall. I am extremely obedient. A second later, the yellow crayon rolled back into the room, followed by a folded piece of paper. Noah opened it. In careful, uneven letters, someone had written song. His heart did a small, dangerous flip. No, he whispered, softer now. I cannot. Your father will turn me into a cautionary tale with employee paperwork. The hallway stayed silent. Then Lucas stepped into view. He wore one sock and held his stuffed rabbit by one ear. Oliver stood behind him, arms crossed, looking far too much like a 5-year-old security director. Mason hid half his face behind Oliver's shoulder. None of them spoke. They did not need to. Noah looked at the red underlined rule on his schedule, then at the 3 small faces waiting in the doorway, and felt his common sense pack a suitcase and leave the state. He knelt several feet away, keeping his hands in his lap. I cannot sing the song, he said gently, but I can hum while I fold towels. Humming is not singing. It is laundry with atmosphere. Oliver narrowed his eyes as if reviewing the legal distinction. Lucas sat down first. Mason followed, then Oliver, still suspicious but clearly outvoted. Noah turned back to the towels and hummed one careful note, then another. The melody was softer than rain on glass. Lucas leaned against the doorframe. Mason's shoulders lowered. Oliver opened the music book on the floor and touched one page with 2 fingers. There, written beneath the notes, was the line Noah had gotten wrong the night before. Not a sleepy bear in rain boots. A little wolf in borrowed shoes. Noah stopped humming. The room seemed to tilt again. That was when Mrs. Ellery appeared at the end of the hall, her face going pale. Behind her, just visible on the staircase, stood Alexander Whitmore, home far earlier than anyone expected, his gaze fixed not on Noah, but on the music book open at his feet. Alexander looked at the music book as if it had risen from a grave he had paid very expensive people to seal. The hallway became so quiet that Noah could hear one towel slip from the stack and land on the floor with the softest, most guilty little flop in history. Mrs. Ellery did not move. The triplets did not move. Noah, unfortunately, continued existing in the center of the disaster with a laundry basket, a forbidden melody, and the facial expression of a man who had accidentally opened a family curse while trying to be employed. Alexander came down the last few stairs slowly. His polished shoes made no sound against the marble, which felt unfair. A man that intense should at least announce himself with thunder or a warning label. Where did you find that? He asked. His voice was calm, but calm like ice over deep water. Noah swallowed. It slid into the laundry room. That was technically true. It sounded ridiculous, but truth often did when children were involved. Alexander turned his eyes to the boys. Oliver stared back with the fearless misery of someone too small to win and too stubborn to surrender. Mason clutched the hem of his own pajama shirt. Lucas had gone pale, his rabbit pressed under his chin. Alexander held out one hand. Give it to me. Noah picked up the music book carefully. The cover felt warm from the children touching it. For one wild second, he imagined refusing. Then he remembered he had $12 in his bank account and no backup plan beyond emotional sincerity, which had never once paid rent in Massachusetts. He placed the book in Alexander's hand. The moment Alexander saw the name inside, something passed across his face. Not anger, not exactly grief, more like recognition arriving late and unwelcome. Clara Whitmore, Noah said before his brain could file a formal objection. She wrote it. Mrs. Ellery inhaled sharply. Alexander closed the book. My wife did not sing. The sentence dropped flat. Final. Practiced. Noah looked at the triplets before he could stop himself. 3 little faces had changed in the same instant. Oliver's jaw tightened. Mason looked at the floor. Lucas shook his head once, small and fierce. Noah felt the air leave his lungs. Sir, he said carefully, I do not want to overstep. Then do not, Alexander replied. Excellent advice. Extremely simple. Noah wished his mouth had attended the meeting. But the song exists. The boys know it. Lucas corrected me. The words were out now, standing in the hall with shoes on. Alexander's eyes cut back to him. Lucas spoke because you upset a pattern he recognized. It does not mean anything. It means he remembered, Noah said softly. The alpha's scent shifted, not harsh, but colder, like rain turning to sleet. Mrs. Ellery stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, perhaps Dr. Harlan should be called. Alexander nodded once, still looking at Noah. The children will return to their room. Mr. Bennett will resume his duties. The music book will be placed in my study. No one will mention this again. No one moved. Then Oliver did something that made every adult in the hall forget how breathing worked. He walked to Alexander, took the music book from his father's hand with both of his tiny hands, and carried it back to Noah. He did not speak. He did not need to. He pressed the book against Noah's chest, then tapped the silver moon on the cover twice. Alexander stared at his son. Noah stared at the book. Mrs. Ellery looked like she might need a chair and perhaps a new religion. At last, Lucas whispered from behind Mason's shoulder, Mama sang. The words were small, barely there, but they broke through the hallway like sunrise through locked curtains. Alexander went completely still. Noah saw it then, the real crack beneath the perfect suit, the perfect posture, the perfect alpha control. This was not a man protecting a rule. This was a father realizing that the silence in his house had been hiding a song. Dr. Harlan arrived 37 minutes later with a leather medical bag, silver glasses, and the professional expression of a man who had charged people $400 an hour to say the word complicated. Noah stood near the nursery door with his hands folded behind his back, trying very hard to look like a responsible employee and not like the emotional criminal who had accidentally reopened the saddest chapter in Whitmore House. Alexander stood by the window, tall and rigid, his reflection cut into pieces by the rain-streaked glass. The triplets sat together on the rug, the music book between them like a tiny forbidden campfire. Dr. Harlan crouched in front of Lucas first and asked gentle questions. Lucas stared at his rabbit. Mason leaned into Oliver. Oliver stared at the doctor with the intense suspicion of a retired detective trapped in kindergarten. After several minutes, Dr. Harlan stood and adjusted his glasses. It may have been a temporary response to sensory memory, he said. A familiar melody can trigger isolated speech in children with selective mutism or trauma-related silence. Alexander did not turn around. So it means nothing. Noah felt those words hit the room and hated how quickly the children lowered their eyes. Dr. Harlan hesitated. I would not say nothing. I would say fragile. Alexander finally faced him. Then we do not push. No songs. No experiments. No emotional disruption. His gaze flicked to Noah for half a second. Especially from staff. There it was. Staff. One little word, polished smooth enough to bruise. Noah nodded because nodding was free and unemployment was expensive. Yes, sir. But inside, his heart made a sound like someone stepping on a cracker in church. That afternoon, the mansion returned to order, or tried to. Noah polished the dining room table. He sorted linen. He dusted shelves filled with books no one seemed to read. Everywhere he went, 3 small shadows followed at a careful distance. Oliver appeared first behind a column. Mason hid behind a curtain that absolutely did not hide him. Lucas trailed last, dragging his rabbit and looking personally betrayed by every rule ever invented. Noah whispered, I am working. Lucas pointed at the music room. Noah shook his head. Your father said no. Mason held up a ribbon. Blue satin, wrinkled at the end. Noah blinked. Is that a bribe? Oliver produced 2 more ribbons from his pocket and offered them with solemn authority. Noah pressed a hand to his mouth. This was not fair. Tiny children should not be allowed to unionize. I cannot accept payment for illegal humming, he whispered. Lucas looked down, and the softness in his face made Noah lose the argument before it began. Fine. 1 minute. No words, just humming. In the old playroom, Noah sat on the floor while the triplets gathered around him. He hummed, so quietly the walls could pretend not to hear. One by one, the boys tied the ribbons around his wrist, loose and careful, as if marking him as something chosen. Noah looked at the 3 colors resting against his skin and felt his throat tighten. He was still sitting there 20 minutes later, silent now, with Lucas asleep against his knee, Mason curled near his side, and Oliver leaning against the toy chest while refusing to admit his eyes were closing. That was how Alexander found them. He stood in the doorway without speaking. Noah startled awake, ready to apologize, but the words died when he saw Alexander's face. The alpha was not angry. Not this time. He was looking at his sons as if someone had opened a door inside his chest, and all the warmth had frightened him. His eyes moved to the ribbons on Noah's wrist. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then Alexander whispered, "They have not slept without medication in 2 years." Noah looked down at the boys, at their small, relaxed hands, their soft breathing, their faces finally free of fear. He should have said something professional, something safe. Instead, he said, maybe they were not waiting for medicine. Maybe they were waiting to feel safe. Alexander closed his eyes, and for the first time since Noah had entered Whitmore House, the powerful alpha looked like he did not know how to stand. The next morning, the entire mansion behaved as if the night before had been a clerical error. The triplets were awake before 7, dressed in matching sweaters, hair neatly combed, shoes tied, faces solemn. Noah found them in the breakfast room sitting side by side at the long table, small and pale beneath a chandelier that looked like it had been designed to intimidate Soup. Alexander sat at the far end with a tablet in one hand and a cup of coffee untouched beside him. He looked composed again, which Noah found rude. A man should not be allowed to have a visible emotional collapse one night and return to looking like a luxury watch advertisement the next morning. "Good morning," Noah said softly as he entered with a tray of toast and fruit. 3 little heads turned at once. Lucas lifted his hand by exactly 2 inches. Mason looked at the blue ribbon still tied around Noah's wrist and smiled so faintly it almost needed a witness. Oliver simply watched him, serious as ever, but the corner of his mouth moved. Noah nearly dropped the tray. Alexander noticed. Of course he noticed. The man noticed everything except apparently his own feelings, which had gone missing somewhere around 2019 and had not left a forwarding address. Before Noah could escape back to the kitchen, Mrs. Ellery appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Whitmore, your aunt has arrived early." Alexander's expression cooled by several degrees. "Send her in." Noah had never met Evelyn Whitmore, but he knew trouble when it entered wearing pearls at breakfast. She swept into the room in a cream coat, silver hair pinned perfectly, smile sharp enough to peel paint. "Alexander, darling," she said, kissing the air beside his cheek. Then her eyes moved to the children, paused on Noah, and narrowed with immediate, expensive disapproval. "New staff." Noah stepped back. "Noah Bennett, ma'am." Evelyn looked him over like he was a stain that had learned manners. "An Omega Maid in the family wing. How modern of you." The room tightened. Noah lowered his eyes because he liked employment and disliked becoming a headline. Alexander's jaw shifted, but before he could speak, Evelyn continued, "I only hope the children are not being confused by too much softness. They need structure, not sentimental little songs from hired help." Lucas stopped chewing. Mason's fork slipped against his plate with a tiny clink. Oliver went very still. Noah felt the ribbons around his wrist as if they had warmed against his skin. Alexander set down his tablet. "Aunt Evelyn." His voice carried a warning, quiet and controlled. But Evelyn smiled wider, unaware or unwilling to care. "I am only saying what everyone is thinking. After Clara, this house became fragile enough. Let us not pretend a pretty voice and an apron can replace a mother." The words did not shout. They did not need to. They landed softly, and somehow that made them worse. Noah's throat closed. He looked at the floor and told himself to breathe. He was staff. He was temporary. He was not allowed to hurt over a place that had not invited him to belong. Then a chair scraped. Small feet touched the rug. Oliver stood at the table, both hands curled at his sides, his face pale, but steady. Alexander turned toward him as if the world had stopped. Mason stared. Lucas clutched his rabbit with both hands. Oliver looked directly at Evelyn and spoke in a voice clear enough to reach every corner of the room. Do not talk to our Noah like that. Silence crashed down so completely that even the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to hesitate. Evelyn's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Noah forgot how to swallow. Alexander rose slowly from his chair, his eyes fixed on his son with something like wonder and heartbreak tangled together. Oliver did not look away. He is not replacing Mama, Oliver said, each word careful, as if he had carried them for years and was afraid of dropping them. He found her song. Mason made a tiny sound beside him. Then, trembling, Mason whispered, "He sings it warm." Lucas nodded hard, tears shining on his cheeks. "Noah's safe," he said. Noah pressed one hand over his mouth. 3 voices. 3 impossible voices. Not a miracle made of magic, but something braver. Choice. Trust. A door opening from the inside. Alexander stepped around the table and lowered himself to one knee in front of Oliver, his perfect suit creasing without permission. He did not touch him. He only held out his hand and waited. Oliver stared at it for a long moment, then placed his tiny hand in his father's. Alexander closed his eyes as if that small weight had undone him. Evelyn whispered, "Alexander, this is inappropriate." Alexander opened his eyes, and this time the coldness in them had a purpose. "What is inappropriate?" he said quietly, "is making my children defend kindness at my own table." Evelyn went red. Noah felt his knees threaten to resign. Alexander looked at him then, not as staff, not as a problem, but as the person his children had chosen in front of everyone. "Stay," he said. It was not an order this time. It was almost a plea. Noah nodded once, because speaking would have turned him into a puddle in sensible shoes. Oliver squeezed Alexander's hand, then reached for Noah with the other. And for the first time since Noah had entered Whitmore House, the breakfast room did not feel like a museum. It felt like a family learning how to make noise. Again, after breakfast, Whitmore House did not return to silence. It tried, obviously, because old mansions were dramatic and deeply committed to emotional repression, but it failed by lunchtime. The triplets spoke in pieces, tiny pieces, like they were placing stones across a river one careful step at a time. Lucas asked for apple juice. Mason said no peas with the grave seriousness of a man rejecting a business merger. Oliver corrected Mrs. Ellery when she called Noah Mr. Bennett, because apparently our Noah had become his official legal title. Noah handled this with dignity, grace, and only one brief moment in the pantry where he pressed his forehead against a shelf of organic cereal and whispered, "Please do not cry into the billionaire granola." Alexander stayed close all day without admitting he was staying close. He answered emails in the breakfast room, took calls in the hall, and appeared in doorways with the timing of a very handsome ghost in a custom suit. Whenever one of the boys spoke, his face shifted for half a second, almost too quick to catch. Wonder, fear, hunger for more. Then control slid back over him, polished and perfect, because Alexander Whitmore could apparently manage a corporation worth billions, but had no idea what to do with the word daddy when Mason whispered it while handing him a blue crayon. That afternoon, while the boys napped for the first time without medicine or tears, Noah carried fresh blankets to the third-floor storage hall. He had been told not to enter the attic. Naturally, the attic door was open, because houses with secrets had terrible boundaries. A thin melody drifted from inside. Not singing, not humming. Mechanical. Soft. Noah stepped closer with every sensible part of him screaming absolutely not. The attic smelled like dust, cedar, and rain trapped in old wood. White sheets covered furniture like sleeping ghosts. Near the far window sat a small wooden box with a silver moon carved into the lid, turning slowly as it played the same lullaby. Noah knew that melody now. He knew it in his ribs. The little wolf in borrowed shoes. He touched the lid, and beneath the music, something clicked. The box opened to reveal folded letters, dried white flowers, and a photograph of Clara Whitmore sitting at the piano with 3 newborn babies asleep in a basket beside her. On the back, in blue ink, she had written, "For my sons, when they are afraid of the dark." Noah's throat tightened. He did not hear Alexander behind him until the Alpha said his name. Noah turned, nearly dropping the photograph. "I am sorry." The door was open, and the music started, and I know that sounds like the beginning of every bad decision in a horror movie. Alexander did not smile. His eyes were fixed on the box. "I threw that away," he whispered. Noah looked down at it. "Someone kept it." Alexander crossed the attic slowly, as if approaching a memory that might vanish if startled. He picked up one of the letters, but did not open it. Clara used to hide things from me up here, he said, voice rough at the edges. Birthday gifts. Terrible poetry. Tiny sweaters she ordered before we knew there were 3 of them. Noah held out the photograph. She wrote the song for them. Alexander took it, and something in him folded inward. Before either of them could speak, small footsteps sounded behind them. Oliver stood in the doorway with Mason and Lucas tucked close to his sides. Lucas pointed at the music box. Mama, he said. Mason's lower lip trembled, but his voice came out clear. She sang that night. Alexander turned very slowly. What night? Oliver looked at the floor. The night everyone cried. The music box kept playing, bright and gentle and cruel in its sweetness. Mason took one step forward. There was rain. Lights. People talking loud. Mama told us hide under piano. Lucas hugged his rabbit tighter. We were quiet. Oliver's face tightened with the effort of being brave. Then Mama stopped singing. After that, everybody said do not talk about it. Noah felt cold all over. Alexander went pale in a way no alpha pride could hide. I never told you not to talk. Oliver looked up at him then, eyes shining. You stopped talking first. The words broke the room open without raising their voice. Alexander's hand shook around the photograph. Noah saw the truth land in him, not as blame, but as grief finally finding the right address. He had thought the children were locked away from him by trauma, by doctors, by fate, by some cruel failure of biology. But maybe they had been following him. Maybe when their father buried every song, every picture, every piece of Clara that hurt too much to touch, the boys had learned that love was something dangerous to mention. Alexander lowered himself to the dusty floor, still holding the photograph. For a moment, he looked like the loneliest man in the whole enormous house. I am sorry, he said, and his voice was not powerful at all. I thought forgetting would protect you. Lucas walked to him first, then Mason, then Oliver. They did not rush. They simply stepped into the space around their father and leaned against him, one by one, as if rebuilding a bridge with small warm bodies. Noah stood beside the music box, hands pressed to his chest, trying not to fall apart. Then Alexander looked up at him through the soft, chiming notes and whispered, I forgot how to remember her without losing them. Noah's voice came out gentle. Then we remember slowly. By evening, the attic had stopped feeling like a locked room and started feeling like a wound someone had finally opened to let air in. Clara's letters were carried downstairs in a small cedar box, one by one, not like evidence, but like fragile birds. Alexander placed them on the piano bench in the music room and stood over them for a long time without touching a single envelope. The triplets sat on the rug nearby, sleepy and brave, their little faces turned toward him with the kind of patience children should never have to learn. Noah stayed near the doorway because he knew the shape of almost belonging. It was warm enough to tempt you closer and sharp enough to remind you where the edge was. Dr. Harlan returned after dinner, softer this time, less expensive glasses and complicated, more human. He listened as Alexander explained the attic, the music box, the song, the children speaking. Noah expected relief. Instead, the doctor looked thoughtful in a way that made Noah's stomach fold itself into a paper crane of doom. Attachment can be powerful, Dr. Harlan said carefully, especially when it forms around a single safe figure. Alexander glanced toward Noah. The boys are responding to him. Yes, the doctor said. That is why you must be careful. If they become too dependent too quickly, any separation could feel like another loss. The words were not cruel. That made them worse. Noah stood very still, fingers curled around the ribbons still tied to his wrist. Another loss. There it was, quiet and polished and adult. The thing everyone was too kind to say directly. He was staff. He was new. He was temporary. He was a song with a paycheck. Alexander rubbed a hand over his face. They need stability. Dr. Harlan nodded. They do. Noah waited for Alexander to say that Noah was part of that stability. He hated himself for waiting. Alexander only looked down at Clara's letters and whispered, I cannot let them break again. Noah smiled because smiling was what people did when their hearts were busy tripping down a flight of stairs. Of course, he said, though nobody had asked him anything. I should check the laundry. He left before his voice could embarrass him. In the servants' room that night, Noah packed his suitcase slowly, folding his 2 sweaters, his worn jeans, and the blue, yellow, and white ribbons he could not bring himself to untie. Mrs. Ellery found him near dawn. For once, her face was not stern. "Mr. Bennet," she said softly. Noah shook his head. "Please do not be nice. I am very close to becoming soup." She looked at the suitcase, then at his wrist. "They will miss you." Noah swallowed. That is exactly the problem. He wrote a note for Alexander because leaving without one felt cruel and staying felt selfish. "Thank you for the work. I am sorry for overstepping. Please tell the boys their mother's song was beautiful." It was a terrible note. Too small for what he felt. Too polite for a heart leaving pieces of itself in every hallway. He slipped out through the side entrance while Boston was still gray and wet, pulling his coat tight as the first train whistle sounded somewhere beyond the trees. For the first time since he arrived, Whitmore House did not look cold behind him. It looked asleep. Noah told himself that was good. He told himself the boys had their father. Now, they had Clara's letters. They had the song. They did not need a maid who had accidentally become a home-shaped problem. But inside the mansion, Lucas woke first, reached for the space beside his bed where Noah had promised to return after breakfast, and found nothing. His small voice cracked through the nursery. "Noah?" Mason sat up. Oliver ran to the hall. Within minutes, 3 pairs of bare feet were racing down the staircase, calling the same name again and again, no longer silent, no longer afraid to want someone. Alexander came out of his study with Noah's note in his hand, his face drained of every illusion he had left. Oliver stood at the bottom step, shaking with fury and hurt. "You let him go," he said. Alexander looked at his sons, then at the empty hallway where warmth had been, and finally understood that protecting them from loss had become another way of losing what they loved. Alexander Whitmore had always believed power meant never arriving too late, until his 3 sons, still in pajamas and crying, begged him to bring Noah home. Racing to the train station, Alexander finally admitted, "He thinks I don't know how to ask him to stay." When they found Noah waiting beside the platform with his suitcase, the boys ran first, throwing their arms around him and pleading, "Don't go." Noah dropped to his knees, apologizing through tears, believing leaving would hurt less. Alexander stepped forward, stripped of every defense that had once defined him. "I read your note 3 times. I hated every word," he confessed. "You wrote like an employee returning a uniform. You are not a disruption, and you are not temporary." He admitted he didn't know how to grieve, how to be needed without trying to control everything, or even how to sing. When Lucas whispered, "Try," Alexander did the impossible. In front of strangers on the crowded platform, he sang the lullaby Noah had brought back into their home. His voice faltered, the boys joined in, and Noah broke down completely. Kneeling before him, Alexander quietly said, "Come home, not as my maid, not because the boys need you. Come because you are loved there." Noah whispered, "By them." Alexander answered, "By them and by me." Instead of boarding the train, Noah placed the ribbon from his wrist into Alexander's hand. "I'm not staying for the job." Alexander smiled through tears. "Then stay for us."